Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and address such an august body. What I'm about to deliver is what I believe is the wrecked fishers' perspective of the industry. I wasn't here earlier today to hear Nathan Guy's address, but what I've been told, it's quite a revelation and may well have changed much of what I'm going to talk to you about. What I will address you with is, in the main issues we have a common interest in dealing to. It involves a little bit of history, but I think it will give you a perspective of what my readership is telling me are the issues in our fishery today. To my mind, there are 5 recognised players in this fishery. There's the public and recreational fishers, I guess I represent them. There's the commercial fishers who are actually out on the water, in particular those leasing quota, the customary Maori, the big corporate quota holders, and the politicians in the ministry. Not all are born equal. The single most important player receives almost no recognition, and that is those who follow us, our grandchildren and their grandchildren. I like to think that wrecked fishers have the most in common with the commercial guys leasing or have small quota holdings. They're heavily dictated to by the ministry and the corporates as to the outcome of their fishing. Customary fishers have the Treaty of Waitangi to fall back on, and so they're always going to get their cut, more or less. And anyway, most Maori fish under amateur regulations anyway. Please note at this stage that I haven't used the word shared in our relation to the fishery, because I don't believe at this point in time such an animal exists. Not from where I stand, not yet anyway. There are offshore fisheries, inshore fisheries, pelagic fisheries, depleted fisheries, screwed fisheries, but nothing that is a truly shared fishery. My Collins Dictionary defines share as to divide or apportion, especially equally. I can't see that where that currently applies to my interest in the inshore fish stocks, the only ones I'm really interested in. How many of you grew up with siblings and when it came time to share a cake or a pie or a piece of fruit, the rule you cut and I choose was used to determine a fair share? From a recreational perspective, this hasn't happened in our fishery. To me, shared fishery is, in the industry's context, a means to everlasting constraint on non-commercial fishers. Shared fishery is a construct to frame a discussion. So if we're going to move ahead, the first thing that needs to be put aside is that. In the past, any ministry proposal for a shared fishery always contains provisions to ring-fence the recreational catch, making no allowance for a growing population. Some of its earliest attempts at creating proportional share resulted in the public formation of Option 4. The ministry tried to hoodwink the public into choosing one of 3 options, and my apologies, Dave Turner, all of which were proportional share in one guise or another, and we didn't buy it. The 4th option, or option4.co.nz, you'd be well familiar with, is the Ginger Group for Recreational Representation, has since morphed into Legacy, the New Zealand Sport Fishing Council's public advocacy arm. It was probably the best thing that the Ministry of Fisheries then did ever for recreational fishing, in that it began a unification of that sleeping political giant, the fishing public, and Graham mentioned that in his address. While there are all sorts of figures bandied around, the Minister accepts that around 20% of the population fished. We saw the numbers that were presented by Graham, and I think they ring true with regard to the Hauraki Gulf and the issues that we face there. Add to this 108,000 tourists who fish here every year, and you have a fair bit of clout, both politically and economically. In the interest of moving forward, I don't intend playing the blame game. That's in the past, but if we ignore history, we run the risk of repeating its mistakes. You'll most likely be familiar with the book by the late David Johnson, completed by Jenny Howarth, Hooked, the Story of the New Zealand Fishing Industry. I really enjoyed that. It gave me a great insight as to where our fisheries come from and perhaps where it's gone. But it doesn't always paint industry in a particularly good light, starting with the sealers and whalers, who after Maori were the first traders to exploit the natural bounties of our shores. They were also the first to deplete their target species. In 1792, The first sealers harvested a shipload of skins destined for China, which is kind of ironic. But by the 1820s, the heyday of sealing had passed. The stocks were depleted below a commercially sustainable level. In the mid-1800s, it was the turn of the oyster beds to get a hammering. It took just 14 years to denude Otago Harbour of its beds. And so the story goes on, history repeating itself, just the name of the species and the locations changing. This leads me neatly to what recreational anglers want, and that is, same as you, abundance. What I don't understand is why we must fish our resources down to maximum sustainable yield. To me, it's ecological brinksmanship based on science that may or may not be correct. During the Cold War years, the following World War II, the superpowers of the day brought our planet to the precipice of nuclear disaster. Similarly, in resource management terms, MSY allows the fishery to be screwed down to a very fine line between just surviving and disaster in many cases. International best practice says a fishery should be no less than 40% of the original biomass. So why does New Zealand not follow that recommendation? Now, to achieve that number puts all players between a rock and a hard place. Rec fishers, customary, commercial. Let's just talk Snapper 1 here. At a recent working group meeting, the scientists advised that they now know more about the recreational extraction than the uncertainties associated with the harvest of that stock. The good news for us is that in a recent science points to a much smaller annual amateur take than first thought. So we have been unknowingly saving our allowance. But please don't think it's industries there for the taking. We prefer to bank it with the future in mind. Once again, Graham alluded to the growth in the Auckland population doubling in 20 to 30 years. We'd like to think that we have already started putting fish in the bank for that. A ministry scientist, an MPI scientist, advised that it was important to know that not only what was being retained, which was already being monitored in Snapper 1, but also the number of fish released and their subsequent survival. But that's an almost impossible task. It would really mean monitoring every fisher that ever left the dock. It's an old story though, if you can't measure it accurately, you can't manage it effectively. Restrictions on bag limits, effort and an increase in the minimum size have been the punches that rec fishers have taken on the chin over many years. And some of them have been necessary. Graham and I were talking earlier and we mentioned a 30 blue cod limit in certain parts of the South Island. Well, that's an absolute nonsense. I mean, you just don't need 30 blue cod. All but the most recent reductions have been voluntarily made. To achieve the 40% rebuild, we'll need a commercial sector to take cuts, and that may mean obviously reductions in income for the fishers themselves, a smaller dividend for the corporate shareholders. In the short term, you will share some of the pain that we believe as recreational fishers we've already suffered. This move towards abundance will see politicians come under pressure, the connection between political party leadership and the fisheries corporates being well documented. But let's think this through. What does abundance mean for commercial interests? Yes, short-term pain, but think of the gains. If there are more fish out there, it will be easier to catch. Less effort means a reduction in your costs. There will be an abundance over a variety of year classes, so industry will be able to target specific size fish for different markets with improved returns. There will also be the opportunity to add value to various products, meaning more cash in hand. The value chain is burnt by depletion. It is in an abundant fishery, the value of your product and the spin-offs from producing it will increase. At present, in some fisheries, there is a disjoint between the science and observation. These two often describe very different worlds. Currently, the scientists tell us in the northern Kauai fishery that it is sitting at B52, or 52% of the original biomass. Yep, it's a healthy fishery. But anecdotal evidence, while observing a stability in the fish stocks, does not show the increase the science is apparently indicating. Abundance also offers us the opportunity to conserve fish. Recreational fishers have become more willing to bank fish for future generations, but not for increased exports. There have been few calls from the public to increase bag limits. Nowadays, it's all about saving something for all of our kids, yours and mine. Another way to achieve abundance is the reduction of waste, and I acknowledge the industry's efforts in this direction, with a variety of net styles and systems being successfully trialled by the likes of Sandfoods and Aotearoa Fisheries. Long may it continue. It's certainly a great step in the right direction, and it's something that everybody has to applaud. I've always found it ironic, though, that recreational fishers were prepared to fund research into commercial methods that reduced waste and were less damaging to the environment. I refer to the $35,000 given to kickstart Napier Trawlerman and Rick Birch's work on diamond mesh, when the then Ministry of Fisheries and your own industry kind of disowned it. To its credit, the recreational sector in the 23 years I've been involved with New Zealand Fishing News has pushed the reduced waste message within its own ranks. We have learned from industry about caring for the catch. Few anglers today put to sea without a decent bin and a bag or two of ice, a far cry from the wet sack and the scuppers approach that I grew up with. Icky spikes are now pretty much standard practice on every boat that I fish on. Limit your catch, not catch your limit, has been another war cry being promoted, and there's been a real change in the attitude to valuing breeding stock. One of the problems we have is people supply a photograph for our Facebook page or in the magazine, and the most common reaction is, nice fish, hope you put it back. Social media is going to play a bigger and bigger part in monitoring how we all perform. Other campaigns, such as Matt Watson's Free Fish Heads website, where there's a register of people willing to take frames and heads, is once again an indication of recreational anglers being proactive in conserving and maximising their take. One of the things that is stuck in the craw of recreational anglers is the concessions. The Coromandel Scallop regulations, where industry gets a month's head start and can take fish down to 90 millimetres, whereas a recreational gatherer, I get to pick over what's left and can only take 100 millimetre size shells, really kind of sticks in our craw. And I think that those sorts of things, and example also in the Cray 3 fishery in the Gisborne area, it's been going on for a long time. We really feel that the recreational voice has not been heard or acted upon. The fishery has not been managed for abundance. And to my mind, that's not the way forward. It is only divisive. The Ministry has its hopes pinned on joint working group arrangements, but there's not too many good stories to tell at this stage, but that may well change following the Minister's address today. The litmus test for me will be the Snapper One joint working group. This was set up by the Ministry with representatives from commercial, customary and recreational interests, and is chaired by Sir Ian Barker, an internationally recognised arbitration judge whose involvement should ensure transparency. With access to considerable science, this group was challenged to come up with a strategic plan to manage Snapper One, North Cape to East Cape. It was a fishery that is of great importance to recreational fishers and industry alike. Once again, Graham's already alluded to that. There have been over 20 meetings in the last 18 months, and although no result has been announced, MPI are hanging their hat on this as the best management method going forward. Returning to the second part of my speaking brief, trust, it's fair to say there is a great deal of mistrust amongst all parties involved, not just between recreation and commercial interests, and it's obviously very much historical. It's probably well founded, as several recent documentaries on the state of our industry and the likes of joint venture boats can attest. I mean, it's been a real bone of contention and something that your spin doctors will need to do a great deal to address, I believe. But having said that, management processes are far from transparent at this stage, and add to this the murky world of political and big business ties, and you have a breeding ground for what recreational anglers see as discontent. Recreational fishers believe that they have constantly carried the can for the disproportionately for the demise of many fisheries. They get the scraps of any deal, and with the dollar value always being thrown back in our faces. But I believe that is about to change. The one thing that is going to have a major impact on the recreational stake around the bargaining table is the current study being undertaken to the dollar value of the recreational fishery on the New Zealand economy. Similar studies by this reputable international company, Southwick Associates, and others, undertaken worldwide, puts an extremely high value on the fish stocks caught recreationally, to the point some governments have made law changes in favour of recreational interests. I predict the same will ultimately happen here. The Ministry commissioned a similar study a number of years ago, but despite it passing peer review, was not accepted after industry kicked up a stink. Obviously, its findings were not to your liking. My good friend Mr. Collins described trust as to consign to care, with other synonyms for trust being guardianship, protection, safekeeping, and having faith in. In the past, commercial fishermen were almost in every town dotted around our coastline. They were part of the community and were trusted as generally hard-working, honest people. They often shared their knowledge willingly with recreational fishers, but as more and more of the quota was soaked up by the corporates, these people were less evident in our community. This came at a time when reductions in fish stocks impacted on recreational catch, and those commercial fishers left in the smaller communities probably bore the brunt of criticism for a situation which was mainly out of their control. In the interest of fostering trust, as an editor of New Zealand's biggest fishing magazine, I would really like to do a series of stories on the commercial industry. There's a lot to be learned from you guys, how you fish in a practical sense, and I wouldn't want this to turn into a snow job of my readers, but I think there would be some true value in it. Not only would we learn some tips and tricks from the professionals on how to improve our own catch, but many of your problems are our problems. It will lead to a better understanding, I believe, of each other's position. So how do we restore trust between all sectors? If I can only go back to that one word, abundance. If there's plenty of fish to go around, many of the areas of conflict will pall into insignificance. The one thing we can all work together on will be of mutual benefit, and that is eliminating the theft from our fishery. Kiwis have an innate sense of fairness. While we're not generally whistleblowers, we are quick to recognise when one group or another takes unfair advantage over the other by foul means. The public are increasingly using the Ministry's 0800 poacher number, and as articles show in our magazine, reports of issues that have gone through the court, it's been very effective. And if we see something that's not right in our fishery, we're very, very keen to see that it's taken care of. And so, as I say, the 0800 number is really effective, and long may it continue. I guess one of the issues we have that when a member of the public runs foul of the law, the impact of that transgression is relatively small on the fishery. When a commercial fisherman gets it wrong, the results is often measured in tonnes. So there you have it, my personal thoughts on a fishery that one day I sincerely hope I can refer to as shared in a trusting environment. We all need to fish for the future, not just for today. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to further discussions over a beer and dinner. Please don't shoot the messenger.